Are you ready to step into history with one of the most shocking moments? As I sit down with renowned historian Barry Strauss to uncover the real story behind the assassination of Julius Caesar. Moving beyond myth and legend, this episode dives into the calculated conspiracy, the forgotten players, and the complex man at the center of it all. Was Caesar a tyrant, a reformer, or something in between? But this isn't just about ancient Rome. It's about power, ambition, and warning signs that still echo today. As this conversation unfolds, you'll see how Caesar's rise and fall mirror modern political struggles, raising one big question: did his assassination save the Republic or destroy it? I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, Dr. Barry Strauss. Well, we have Barry Strauss here. How you doing, Barry?
Good, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing amazing, and I can't believe it's March. I can't believe we're in the midst of almost spring, and but we had to have you on to talk about one of the most controversial mysteries and conspiracies, I think, that still is going on even after thousands of years later. But Barry, I want to start with this. Okay, so the assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March is probably really one of the most famous political murders in history. But when you look at it as a real historical evidence, beyond Shakespeare, beyond Hollywood, what actually happened inside the Senate chamber, and how did it differ from the real story versus the legend?
Well, great question. And I wrote a book on the subject called The Death of Caesar. So maybe I shouldn't say it's near and dear to my heart, but it's something that I've thought about a lot. The Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is marvelous, and the Hollywood movie.
Yes, it is.
Also quite wonderful. But the impression that Shakespeare gives us is that this was all a last-minute thing with the conspirators saying, hey, let's go kill Caesar. And they just all put it together. In fact, it was a very carefully thought-out plot led by people who were professional warriors and who knew how to kill someone and who also knew how to carry out a conspiracy. And they planned it very thoughtfully. They were prepared for contingencies and set things up so the chances of success were maximized.
Oh, wow.
So we have to keep that in mind. Caesar, of course, was also a professional warrior, not a fool, and he had to be managed very carefully, and his supporters had to be managed carefully in order to pull the assassination off, and that's what they did.
I know many people see Caesar as like a tyrant, but others view him really as a reformer who wanted to modernize Rome. In your research, who was Caesar? Which direction did he actually lean, or was he a little bit of both?
Yeah, it's not surprising that Caesar is hard to pin down. He was an intensely complicated person, immensely talented, rare person who was at once a brilliant politician, a brilliant general, and a brilliant writer. His works, two of his works, the Gallic War and the Civil War, survive, and they are rightly considered to be classics. We don't have his other works other than a few quotations here and there and a few letters. But he was a man of many parts. He was a product of the Republic, Roman Republic, and of the nobility. He came from from the bluest blood in Rome, and he longed to have the kind of success that his peers in the Republic could give him. But in a way, he grew out of that. He outgrew the Republic through his extraordinary military success. Conquering Gaul, which is to say France, ancient equivalent of France, Belgium, part of the Netherlands, a little bit of Germany, 2 expeditions to Britain, to England. And eventually he engages in a civil war against the whole Republic, and he defeats everyone. fighting from one end of the Mediterranean, from the Near East, from what is today Turkey, to the other, to Spain, Britain. So tremendously successful, powerful person. He, not by planning, but the way things work out, he ends up holding a position that no Roman had ever held before. He was dictator for life.
Wow.
But he's a dictator with a vision. He does want to reform the Republic. All his career, he was on the side of the common man, of the ordinary people of Rome. And although he himself was an elitist, not a democrat, he wanted to use the power and the wealth of the Roman state to help the poor in a way that not all politicians did. He had a series of reforms also that he had in mind. For instance, one of the problems that had bedeviled the Republic for generations was how do you reward veterans? Generals had rewarded their veterans by giving them land in Italy. But the only way to get land in Italy to give them was to take the land away from someone else. Right. So it's an endless cycle of civil war.
Right.
So what Caesar starts doing is he creates veterans colonies abroad, which is a brilliant solution to the problem. Caesar had many other reforms in mind, and one of them was reforming the calendar. Caesar is the person who gives us more or less the calendar that we have today, the solar calendar of 365 and a quarter days. It was originally called the Julian calendar after Julius Caesar, and it's slightly reformed in the 18th century by Pope Gregory, so we call it the Gregorian calendar, but it's basically the calendar that Julius Caesar brought to Rome. Those are the good things he wanted to do. The not so good things that he wanted to do was to cement his own position as dictator for life, and to see to it that his family continue to be the first family in Rome. What this would look like, it's not clear that Caesar had figured that out. And it's not an easy thing for anyone to figure out, because Rome was a very proud republic. And in the end, the fact that he flirted with being a monarch is his undoing. It leads to the assassination. So really complex man.
Yeah, and you mentioned that he was a Roman republic, but was Rome already in collapsing, or did his rise accelerate the collapse later?
His rise accelerated the collapse. The Republic had been in trouble for almost a century. There had been a series of riots, revolts, murders, and civil war, downright civil war, with huge numbers of casualties, and spilled out all over the ancient world. It was pretty clear that the Republic couldn't continue in the form that it was that it already existed in. At least to my mind, and to that of some, but not all historians, the Republic couldn't continue. It needed reforms. It needed major reforms and major changes. But unfortunately, these changes only came through violence. The Republic did not reform itself peacefully.
Yeah. I know in your book you highlighted a figure or figures, but especially the Decimus Brutus as a key conspirator. Why has history and popular culture largely kind of ignored some of the most important players in the assassination plot? Yeah.
Well, Decimus, a fascinating figure. Most of us don't know about him because he's not really in Shakespeare. Shakespeare, first of all, gets his name slightly wrong. He calls him Decius, and not Decimus. And he makes him a relatively small fish in the story. That's because Shakespeare got his information above all from Plutarch. And Plutarch is not much interested in Decimus. Plutarch's hero of the assassination is Marcus Junius Brutus, a man after Plutarch's heart, because in addition to being a politician, he is a philosopher. and Plutarch is a fan of Greek philosophy. But Decimus is very important. We know about him from other sources, and particularly from someone whose work does not survive in full. We only have a very small section of it. A man named Nicholas of Damascus, a Greek who came from Damascus, Syria, and who ends up, after a colorful career, ends up fetching up in Rome. And he wrote a life of the Emperor Augustus. And in it, he has a description of the conspiracy and the assassination. Very important, gives us a different picture than we get from Plutarch. And in his work and that of others, we can see that Decimus was a key player. And so it's not just a story of Brutus and Cassius, the story we know from Shakespeare. It's also a story of Decimus Brutus, a distant relative of Marcus Brutus.
Wow. One thing I at least if I was in Caesar's shoes, and I'm still curious, why do you think, and why does history, or what does history say about Caesar? Why did he walk into that Senate that day when he had so many warnings, omens and political tension, and even friends said, hey, stay home, don't go? Why? Was this an ego thing, or? Partly
an ego thing. Partly Caesar was very arrogant. Partly it's an intelligence thing. Caesar was very rational. Rome had just suffered a 4 years long civil war, and Caesar knew if he was assassinated, it would reignite the flames of civil war. And he reasoned, who would be crazy enough to start a civil war again in Rome? So he thought that was insurance. The other thing is Caesar was a risk addict. All his life, he loved taking risks, pushing things to the edge. And I think he thought that this was yet another risk. Another factor was that, as I said, Caesar was a Roman noble's noble. And he felt that as a Roman noble, it was beneath his dignity to walk around Rome with a bodyguard or with wearing armor, just something he didn't want to do. But only tyrants had bodyguards, as Caesar put it. And Caesar said, I'm not a tyrant. He refused to be pegged as a tyrant. That's not the way he wanted to see himself look. Finally, he was betrayed by his friends. They lied to him, especially Decimus, who was pretty close to Caesar. And Decimus was a snake, constantly telling Caesar, nothing to worry about. A friend of mine, a retired military officer, said that Decimus was his chief of security. Decimus was the guy who said to Caesar, I got it covered, boss. You don't have to worry. Decimus owned a troop of gladiators, and gladiators were enforcers in Rome in this period. There was no police force. And Decimus said to Caesar, my gladiators are on the scene if we need them. And they were. But of course, Decimus had another plan how he wanted to use these gladiators.
Did Caesar think of himself, you hear this a lot, think of himself as a god?
I don't think so. So Caesar was declared a god. The Senate decreed that Caesar should be worshipped as a god. It is unclear if this was something that was put forward by Caesar's friends or his enemies. Some people think it was his enemies trying to embarrass the guy.
Right.
And by saying
Makes sense.
He's a god. I think that Caesar was too much of a rationalist to believe that he was a god. Caesar was a follower of Epicurean philosophy, a different kind of philosophy than the one that Brutus believed in, but it is a highly rational philosophy.
Wow.
Who thought that the gods existed, but that human beings, by and large, controlled their own destinies. So I don't see Caesar as somebody who would have really believed that he was a god. He might be willing to play along with that, but I don't see him believing it.
Wow. That's good to know, because in Egypt and a lot of those times, the leaders always thought of themselves as God, and so that's interesting to hear that. But one thing you did mention that Caesar predicted a civil war, and the conspirators, if I can say it, believed that they had restored the freedom of Rome, but instead it did trigger a civil war. Why did their plans fail so bad?
Why did their plans fail?
Yeah.
It's partly because they were too idealistic and too arrogant. So Brutus thought, and too arrogant and in a way too cheap. They didn't really understand that the real power in Rome did not lie with the Senate and a charmed circle of Roman aristocrats. It lay with the army. And the only way to secure their political power and their vision for Rome was to get the army on their side. And frankly, the only way to get the army on their side, especially now that they had killed Caesar, was to bribe them. But they don't. What they say to the soldiers is, we know that Caesar has given you a lot of bennies, and we're not going to take them away. But that was the wrong pitch. What they should have said is, we're going to increase it. We're going to give you more than Caesar did. We're a better boss than Caesar is. Excuse me, I'm having a minor problem with this chair. Let me just
that's okay.
Get it up a little higher. Yeah, that's
there. You go.
Okay, here I am. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, that's. I think that was their fundamental mistake, so it does devolve. The situation devolves very rapidly after the assassination. Within a week of the assassination, they've lost control of Rome.
Yeah, and what from Caesar's murder to that week?
Yeah.
Who was in charge? Was the Senate as a whole in charge, or did they place somebody else in the leadership role?
So the Senate as a whole was in charge, but the consul is Mark Antony, and Marcus Antonius, the Roman name, and Antony was Caesar's colleague and Caesar's friend, and Antony wanted. Now that Caesar is gone, Antony wanted himself to be the leading man in Rome. So Antony does a few things. The one thing he does so the assassination is March 15th. On a meeting of the Senate on March 17th, Antony ushers in a resolution which is passed to grant amnesty to all the conspirators. To grant amnesty to the conspirators. So the conspirators think they are home free. But they make a mistake. First of all, some people would say they make a mistake in letting Mark Antony live, that they should have assassinated him as well. Plutarch says that. But be that as it may, the other mistake they make is to agree that Caesar can have a state funeral. And as we know from Shakespeare, Antony turns that funeral into a riot. A riot that scares the assassins and ultimately forces them out of Rome.
Do you think the dictator for life was the inevitable assassination, or do you feel that this was even before that appointment?
There were a couple of things that went on in that winter of 45/44 BC. One, as you say, is being named dictator for life, dictator in perpetuo. Another is a series of incidents in which Caesar is acclaimed as a king, as a rex, which is the dirtiest word in Roman politics. Some other events in that period in which Caesar showed his disrespect for the normal system of elections in Rome. That offended not only the elite, but also ordinary people who liked having the power of electing their officials, and who also liked, frankly, the bribes they were paid to vote early and vote often for the politician of their choice. But there's one other factor we have to include, and that is Caesar's mistress. Caesar's mistress was the most famous woman in the world, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. And you'd never know it from Shakespeare, but Cleopatra was in Rome at the time.
Oh, wow.
She'd come to Rome to see Caesar, and Caesar put her up in Caesar's palace, actually, Caesar's villa, which is just across the Tiber River from Rome. As far as we can tell from the sources, which is not 100% clear, she was carrying a second child of Caesar's at the time. She'd already given birth to her son, Ptolemy Caesar, also known as Caesarion. And it was generally thought that Caesar was the father of this child who was going to be the king of Egypt. And now it appeared she was pregnant with yet another child by Caesar. She eventually has a miscarriage. But to many Romans, it seemed, what is this? His mistress is the queen of Egypt? This guy must really think he's going to be a king. And we're not going to tolerate this in Rome. It's just not the way the Republic works. So I think Cleopatra's shadow is also a big part of the reason for the conspiracy.
You know, here in America, we have Benedict Arnold. It sounds like there is so many, but so many part of that crew. But is there one that they still use today in their language that refers to these conspirators?
That's a really great question. I don't think so precisely in the same way we use Benedict Arnold, but in Dante, so Dante is the father of Italian literature, in the Inferno, Brutus is there being punished for his treason. So if there's any figure, this is Marcus Junius Brutus, if there's any figure from the story who is a Benedict Arnold figure, I'd say it would be Brutus.
I wonder if, because, you know, we also say he's such a brute. I wonder if that's where that comes from.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so. Yeah.
But it does sound like Caesar did have immense popularity among the people, but the opposition was the elites, because they're like, wait a minute, if this guy's going to become the dictator for life and king and all this stuff, you know, we don't want to be bowing down to this person. You know, we're on the same level. But is that tension between the populism and the ruling class a reoccurring pattern throughout history of Rome?
Yes. You know, with the proviso that it's slightly more complicated, there's some of the elites who were with Caesar and some of the ordinary people who felt that Caesar had gone too far.
Yeah.
But with that being said, yes, you're absolutely right. It's perceptive. The tension between the elites who called themselves the best men, the best people, and the supporters of the people, the populares, as they called themselves. This is something that we find again and again through Roman history, particularly in this period.
When you were saying about Caesar's family, after Caesar was assassinated, what ended up happening for the people that don't know history, what ended up happening to his family? Did they go in exile? Did they get murdered also? What ended up happening?
So, great question. The conspirators wanted to make it clear that they were not murderers, that they were not gangsters. And the only person they wanted to kill was Caesar, and they chose to kill him in the Senate house at a meeting of the Senate because they believed that the founder of Rome, Romulus, had also been killed at a meeting of the Senate when he tried to become a king. So they wanted to give the message, this is a political thing. We don't really want to kill anyone, but we have no choice, and we're not going to touch anybody else. That might have been a mistake. The most important member of Caesar's family was his great-nephew, a man named Gaius Octavius. And Octavius at the time happened to be in Albania, of all places. Why Albania? Because Caesar was planning a great military expedition to the east to conquer Iran, known as Parthia at the time. And he had assembled his army at a Roman port, which was the gateway to the east in a city that's now in Albania. When he gets the news of the assassination, and he comes back to Italy with a trusted group of friends and slowly makes his way to Rome. And there he discovers, if he hadn't known it already, that in Caesar's will, Caesar had left most of his estate to him, to Gaius Octavius, but he also had adopted him posthumously. Now, Romans engaged in adoption of adults, not necessarily of children. They didn't have posthumous adoption. This is something that Caesar kind of invents.
Right.
But later on, it is approved by the Senate. And Gaius Octavius becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. We call him Octavian. And ultimately, he becomes the first emperor of Rome, who we know as Augustus. But it takes a generation of fighting for that to happen. But this young man, he's 18 at the time.
Wow.
This young guy, turns out to be the most talented freshman in history, if you will. He goes on to conquer everyone and everything.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure when Caesar, in his will, it probably did shock Rome that he named Augustus his heir.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't want to pull you into more of the modern world, but I am curious what you think when you look at the fall of Roman Republic. Right. What warning signs should modern democracies pay attention to? Because, like they say, history is there for a reason. We need to learn from our past.
Right.
And what do you think the warning signs are?
Well, I think we have to recognize the fact that everything changes.
Yeah.
The world is constantly in flux, and we have to do a few things. First of all, we have to educate ourselves, and especially young people, as to what the foundations of our republic are. This is the 250th year of American independence, and I think we need to study the Declaration of Independence, know what its principles are, and study the Constitution and know what its principles are. And then we have to recognize the fact that we live in a changing world, and we have to adapt and change. But in doing so, we have to decide and recognize what are the most important things, the things that we won't compromise on, the things that we want to continue and keep. But then recognizing there are other things that we do have to compromise on, that we do have to change. I think one of the problems that befell the Roman Republic was that some of its defenders didn't understand that change was necessary. Change was inevitable. And people like Caesar did understand this. It's one of the reasons why they were successful. They're able to reach out to new elites, not just in Rome and Italy, but around the empire. And they're able to expand their base while recognizing there are things about the Republic we want to continue. If the other side had recognized that as well, then the change could have happened seamlessly, politically, and without violence. Unfortunately, they did not. And so the result is tremendous violence, tremendous upheaval for generations before a new system came into place. And the new system, alas, was not a republic in the way that the old one had been. It did not have the same freedoms that the old republic had had. So sadly, the Romans weren't able to keep it.
Yeah, no, it's every empire has failed or collapsed eventually, and I think a lot of it is to do with not changing with the times, and I think power and ego, and in many ways, Caesar's assassination didn't even end his influence. In fact, it amplified it. And how did his death transform him from a political figure into this a mythic or divine symbol of Rome? I mean, which is fascinating. He went down in history.
Yeah, well, his heir, Augustus, turned Caesar into a god.
Yeah.
Caesar had been proclaimed a god before, but nothing had really happened.
Right.
They'd never set up the cult, but Augustus does it big time. So at the site of Caesar's cremation in the Roman Forum, he builds a temple to the deified Caesar. There is a comet seen in the sky, and this comet becomes a symbol of Caesar's, now among the gods in the heavens. And you could go worship Caesar in this temple anytime you want. In fact, the ruins are still there in Rome, and the place where he was cremated is visible, and there's still people who lay flowers, wreaths at Caesar's grave, because as we said, he was a supporter of the ordinary people in his own dictatorial way. So the Augustus and his successors use the myth of Caesar. They call themselves Caesar. They call themselves Augustus, and they call themselves Caesar. It becomes not just a name; it becomes a title. It becomes a talisman of power. So it is really an ironic evolution for someone who'd once been a human being.
Well, that's what's funny. It's this man that probably, if he would have just lived his life, passed away as an old man, and probably wouldn't have the influence or even the name and history that he does now. And looking at the chaos that followed the rise of Octavian, the fall of the conspirators, don't you think Caesar actually ultimately won even after his death?
In a way, it's true.
Yeah.
In a way, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know before we get out of here, I first of all, I love your writing. I love the books that you put the time and effort into. And I'm a big history buff, so I appreciate when people dive into history and do the work. Like I always say, tell people, do the work that most of us don't have the time to do or just the energy to do. But if you can draw one major lesson from Caesar's assassination that still applies to global politics today, what would it be? And just so people can walk away saying that, like you said earlier, do your history and study not just here in America, but what would it be?
Great question. I'm going to steal a line from an Italian novel called The Leopard, a novel from the 1950s. It's about a time of change and revolution in Italy at the establishment of the Italian independent state in the 19th century. And a member of the younger generation says to his hidebound uncle, he explains to him that he's joining the revolution, and he says, "Uncle, you have to understand, if we want things to stay the same, everything has to change." And I think that's a lesson from the assassination of Julius Caesar. The people who killed him didn't understand that if they wanted to preserve the things that mattered to them, they had to accept change. And I hope that's one lesson we can take away from this.
I think so too. And, Ides of March is kind of related and connected to Caesar. And I think that's something we still, Caesar has influenced, even if you don't even think about it, he's influenced our world to, like you said, calendar and so many different things that we don't even think, that was influenced by Caesar. Which can you just, before we end, one more time kind of give us some influences of that he placed on the world?
Well, sure. The month of July is named after him. July is Julius. The calendar was brought by Caesar from Egypt to Rome, and that's the calendar that we still have today. I would say that as a writer, Caesar is the patron saint of all writers who believe in brevity and wit and simple sounding, simple seeming, and yet very sophisticated prose. All of that comes from Caesar. But there's a darker side of Caesar as well. He was a brutal conqueror. He was a killer. Many thousands. He claimed 1 million people were killed and 1 million people enslaved
Wow.
when he conquered Gaul. I mean, the dark side of Caesar is to think that conquest is great, being a conqueror is great. We get Napoleon, for instance, as someone like
Right.
Caesar. There's a danger of that, and there's a danger of the man on horseback, as the saying goes, that somebody can use his power, his military power, to sweep away the republic and become a dictator. I mean, American history is very different. We have the great example of George Washington, who had supreme military power and doesn't become a dictator and doesn't become a king, but he steps down.
Yeah.
You know? He steps down and hands the power over to others. So Caesar's a cautionary tale. You have to know when to step down, and you have to respect the republic.
Oh, Barry, thank you for those wise words. And people can go to your website, barrystrauss.com, just like Levi Strauss. Do you have any new books coming out, or are you doing any speaking tours or teaching anywhere?
Well, I'm teaching at Stanford. I'm now I'm an emeritus professor at Cornell.
Wow.
And I'm now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. Just finished co-teaching a course on classical leadership. Published a book that came out last August called Jews versus Rome, 2 Centuries of Rebellion against the world's mightiest empire. And now I'm working on deception. History of military deception. So
you'll have to come back for that one. I definitely
be glad to. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Barry. We really appreciate you, and happy Ides of March and March itself. And hope you have a great spring, and hope to see you back here soon.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Truth Be Told right here. Again, look, another amazing guest, another amazing show, bringing you history. We can learn from history, so let's do it. And like I always said when I end, take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you next Friday.